Welcome to the A Minute to Midnight show, folks. This is Tony coming to you from New Zealand, and on with me today I have John Heller, who is a very frequently recurring guest on the A Minute to Midnight show, and it's always good to be talking to you, John, and there won't be any shortage of things to discuss again today.
Good to be with you, Tony. I'm living and breathing here in my bunker in Ohio.
Yeah, well, I think we're on day 13 now of lockdown here in New Zealand. Supposedly it was meant to last 28 days, but whether we end up out of lockdown at the end of the 28 days or whether they continue it on, I guess we'll have to wait and see. But things are never going to go back to the way they were, and they're making that pretty clear here. So what's it like in Ohio?
Yeah. Well, we started out with, sort of limits going outside, and here's essential businesses. And my firm started, I work in a large law firm. We started rolling out, and it's hard for me to remember when this happened. I think it was back in late February. We started rolling out, encouraging people to work remotely if they could. I've been in the office since the middle of March, probably 2 times. I went in Monday. I work in the second largest office building in downtown Columbus. It's a 40-story building, has a 6-floor parking garage attached to it. And so there are large law firms. There's a major bank that has its headquarters there. There's a special place in the parking garage near where I park where they have a special, extra gate for the executives of the bank to get in and park. And that's empty. When I was there Monday, my receptionist who comes in every day, she said that the people in security at the building say there's maybe 80 to 100 people come into the building on a daily basis. So things are really shut down.
Yeah, I'd say you probably wouldn't even be allowed to work in our lockdown. Only essential businesses, and that basically stopped the majority of things operating. So
it's kind of an interesting mix of things here. The Google reports I referenced in my prophecy update yesterday show that business visits, retail visits, restaurant visits are all way down, but visits to parks are up maybe 170%.
Well, restaurants and all of those things are all closed here, and retail, unless it's a few specific things. Basically, only supermarkets are the only, and supermarkets and corner stores, we call them dairies here, and petrol stations are the only things that are open. Anything else has to be done online if it's essential. Otherwise, you're not even allowed to, do that. So
I can buy electronics over at Best Buy. They have or golf clubs at some of the golf shops around, and they have you go over and you pick it out online and pay for it, and then you go over and it's so weird. They put it in your car and that type. They have all this. Everybody's advertising contactless.
Yeah.
Things at Costco. They put up plexiglass between you and the cashier, and they have the tap credit card. Now they have the app where you can just scan your membership card with a laser.
Well, you wouldn't be able to buy golf clubs in New Zealand at the moment. In fact, you're not allowed to. The rules came out a few days ago. You can't hunt or fish or surf or swim in New Zealand at all at the moment. And like I live by the ocean, I can go for a walk along the beach, which is great. It's only it's a long beach and there's hardly any people because I'm in a small town with very low density, but theoretically, you're not allowed to go for a swim, or you can't go out there with a fishing line or whatever, which is crazy. But anyway.
Well, we have the local golf courses are open here.
Oh, nothing like that's open in New Zealand.
In some counties, it's the county health departments determine. So the county to the north, you can play golf, but you have to walk. The course close to me, you can ride in a cart, one person to a cart. They've spaced the tee times out to 15 minutes. You're not allowed. What they've done is they turned the golf holes upside down so that your ball doesn't go in the hole; it hits the side. but they shut down the driving range, that's really what I like to do, is just go and hit balls to sort of
Well, no,
ease my frustration.
You couldn't do that here.
Well, and they spread them out, and they wash the ball. You hit the ball out there, and it lays out there for a day. They pick it up and they wash it and they put it in a basket, and you dump the basket onto the mat, and you never touch the ball anyway. But you can't do that, but you can get in a cart and it's just, there's a lot of insanity and insane inconsistencies.
Yeah, well, it's global, and I guess over there you've got different states with different rules, whereas here we've got one country with one set of rules. But it's interesting, yesterday our Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, who I got to say I don't like, but anyway, she said in an article, Jacinda Ardern says there will be contact tracing for the foreseeable future. Contact tracing and strict border restrictions will be the new norm for a long time to come, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says. Speaking to various media outlets on Monday morning, that's yesterday, Ardern emphasised the need for contact tracing and said that surveillance testing would also start soon. This week, she also planned to announce stricter border restrictions around quarantine, but would not give further information. That was on stuff.co.nz. Then looking at America, I'll let you comment on this after I talk for a second. The CDC will set up coronavirus surveillance and data collection system as part of the $2 trillion stimulus bill, which President Trump just signed into law. That was, I think, the end of March. The CDC will launch new surveillance and data collection system to track the spread of coronavirus in the US per coronavirus relief bill. And basically, it's looking like this article that was in the businessinsider.com.au. They're talking about gleaning information from tech platforms and smartphones and used them to monitor the patterns, people's movements and things like that. So we are really in a surveillance state, a global surveillance state. This is growing. I don't think when they start these type of controls and surveillance and that type of thing, they're not going to relinquish it afterwards. They may loosen it slightly, but what they're setting in place now, I think, will be the future.
Yeah, I think that's true. In the prophecy updates that I've done at church the last couple Sundays, I've used a couple videos that I found on Twitter from a company called Tektronix. And they were sort of showing what they can do. In one case, they took a beach in Fort Lauderdale from spring break, took the digital IDs off the phone, created a heat map, and then showed how those would spread across the country over the next 2 weeks. They also did that with people in New York City area after they shut down New York City, and showed how they had moved down the eastern seaboard and into the Midwest. And they tracked about 1.5 million phones. So I know that there's all this concern, particularly in the Christian community, with the mark of the beast and tracking and ID 2020 and all of that stuff. But the New York Times and other people, the New York Times has had a long series this year called The Privacy Project. And whether you agree with their political orientation or not, it's really been a pretty good series. And they show how there's all this data out there right now to track phones, and they can do it by specific digital IDs, whether you really want to or not. So while I share the concerns about, these chips and implants and that sort of thing, the fact of the matter is that we sort of voluntarily carry one around in our pocket all the time. And I think it's almost impossible to avoid that right now. And so the concern is that if you get diagnosed or something like that, and even Bill Gates has come out and said, we're going to have some kind of digital certificate that you'll have to show that you have the antibody. This is what Italy has been saying. You're not going to go back to work until you show you have the antibody against this particular virus. However, they're going to test that, I don't know. And so there's going to be almost like a digital pass. I played a very interesting clip of a guy in Shanghai yesterday that I found. He's a British guy, Tai Chi instructor, and he'd gone back to Shanghai. And I don't know if the lady with him was his girlfriend or his wife, but he was showing things that would happen. And because he had been Um, he had come back to Shanghai. His phone showed yellow. It showed a big yellow dot on his phone, which meant he was not cleared for unrestricted movement around the city. Hers showed green, and she was able to go places. And then it showed them going to her going to the store. And I think after he was cleared, he was able to buy it. The video is about 10 days old. But the interesting thing is Shanghai was still largely shut down at that time. So when China's saying that they're come back and they're all reopened for business and everything, it's a bunch of propaganda. But he was saying, the restaurants aren't open. He was in a mall. There was hardly anybody there. And there are all these massive apartment buildings around him. And what they're doing is they're using facial recognition, tracking, and digital IDs and the things that people have on their phone. And they even know, like when she goes to the store, did she buy candy or did she buy oranges and something healthy? And all of that translates into her score, which allows her to leave the house or not. So this stuff, and how China's been pushing their Huawei, their digital platforms and 5G rollouts in different places. So it's kind of I think a bit of a myth or a pipe dream to think that all the concerns that we have about being tracked and everything are not, they're already here. And so the question is, how far are we going to let people go? Now, I think there's a pushback somewhat, but the powers that be seem to be leaning towards, hey, we got to track these people. Here in Ohio, it's a smart driver's license that you need. I think most states have them now. I think there's still a couple states that are holdouts. And if by July 30th, the state has not adopted this special driver's license format, you're not going to be able to get on a plane in the United States if you don't have the right kind of digital card driver's license ID. So, and then what the state of Ohio has done is they've taken all of our Bureau of Motor Vehicles pictures and put them into a facial recognition database. And it's millions and millions of pictures because they're using all the historical ones so that they can build this with, integrate it with. I've just noticed this. I live in a fairly affluent suburb of Columbus, Dublin, and I've noticed video cameras appearing on different traffic lights and that sort of thing. So once it's all integrated, we're going to be like China. I don't know that we'll ever stop it. And I think it's here. And look, we always know that bad people will take advantage of things like that.
Yeah, totally. I think I personally believe that this coronavirus was, I don't believe it's a hoax like some people are saying. I don't believe that it's all 5G. 5G may exasperate it, and I'm not a fan of 5G. I think it shouldn't be being rolled out the way it is, but they need 5G to implement the Mark of the Beast system, so that's why they're determined to roll it out. But I do think there is an actual virus, but that this whole thing is not by accident. I'm still leaning more towards the fact that this virus was intentionally released to cause this, to bring in the New World Order, all these controls and things. But another thing, and I can't even remember how to pronounce the guy's name, and I don't have it in front of me here, but the head of the WHO, Jesus or whatever his name is, he is an Ethiopian that was basically put in the job by China. So Ethiopia was totally backed by China, and his own run to be the head of the WHO was sponsored pretty much by China. So he's out there praising China's response to how this whole coronavirus thing is played out. Well, he's praising China because he's beholden to China. And the reality is that this should never have got to where it is if China had have acted properly in the first place. And for him to be praising China, and now we've got this global pandemic that should have been preventable.
Yeah, I'm agnostic on the intentional or unintentional. I know it got out, and it may be when it got out, China really locked down their country. And we talked about this over 2 months ago, that when China locked down and shut down the biggest industrial power in the world now, in terms of manufacturing, shut down, that act, which soon, because they had shut down so much, it also created their demand for oil by about 40% at least, almost overnight. That led to an oil price war and competition between Russia and Saudi Arabia, which has cratered the oil price. So I think we had said back in January that this was going to cause a major economic problems in the world. There were even people reporting on some of the financial news around here on TV, cable TV like CNBC. There were people saying you need to get everything out of the market right now. That was back in late January, around the time we talked. One of the times we've talked recently. So I think that financial contagion, but certainly what's happened is you've seen China step in to take advantage of it. And so some of the things that make me skeptical about it, or inclined to believe that maybe it was an intentional release, is all of a sudden there's one country in the world that seems to have all these medical supplies and everything that are needed by different countries of the world, masks and other things. Now, some of them are being, and my understanding is China is being very much of a strong arm, and you pay for this and we will deliver it to you. They've delivered them to some countries and they've had to throw away 1.5 million or 2 million masks because they're defective. But China won't turn the money back. And then China has also been sort of like, well, do you want the mask or not? And if you want the mask, then you need to enter into this agreement with our Huawei, our digital company, to help install their digital platforms and 5G in your country. And that China's got backdoor things built into these chips and all these other things that they're doing. So this is really troubling to me. I'm not sure how to fight it, but and I agree with you. I think the virus is I think it is real. I think it's a problem. It's caused such. I'm a lawyer. I work with banks and some commercial developers and real estate tenants and that or owners. And Tony, it's completely collapsed the economy here in the United States. I mean, people can't pay their mortgages, they can't pay their rent, and then the owner of the property can't pay the bank. And we, in our bankruptcy practice group at the law firm, we don't think that a lot of people will even bother filing bankruptcy. They'll just go out of business. They'll never file for any kind of bankruptcy protection. They'll just close the doors and walk away. So this is in the cycling through of this contagion is I listen, I'm 66. I don't know how long I have to live. I'm pretty sure that things are not going to go back to the way they were, meaning what they were like even 2 months, 3 months ago in my lifetime. I hate to be, I'm just not that optimistic. I think I'm a realist. I try to call balls and strikes, and I think that that's the way it's going to be. Now, look, I personally, I believe a collapse because of the way banks were financing properties and doing their monies, and some of the things there were. Not sure how to say it. There were some tricks sort of built into the system. For example, when we had a lot of foreclosures, when those properties went to foreclosure, they went at lower prices. That devalued commercial real estate. This is back in the 2010 to 2014 range. And so what happened around 2014, 2015, I don't think there was a conspiracy among the banks, but they've essentially shut down their mortgage foreclosure. It had a huge impact on my personal business and some of my firm's people that do banking and foreclosure work in our office. These aren't commercial properties because it depressed the price of the properties, and then the banks would have to mark them to market, and then they have capital requirements. So if they have to lower the value of their assets that they have liens on, then they have to pour more liquid capital into the bank to meet their liquidity ratios. Now, the interesting thing that's happened in the financial collapse here in the last month is that the central banks and bank regulators in the United States, and I know in the UK, and I think in Australia, have essentially reduced the capital ratio requirements for banks to 0%. So this is really unprecedented. It's never happened before, and in many respects, I view it as a Hail Mary to save the banking system. So this will not be resolved quickly. And if anybody thinks that the $2 trillion U.S. stimulus plus the Fed commitment to make $4 trillion of easy money available, which amounts to 30% of American GDP, if you think that's it, that's not it. They're going to be printing money like crazy. And then what does that mean when this thing starts to resolve a little bit? It probably means massive inflation on the other side. So the world seems to be set up we're in a very, very complex situation, complex beyond anything that I've seen. The shutdown of everything is collapsing the economy even worse than the China shutdown would have done on its own. And but if you open it back up, you run the risk of a lot of people getting very sick and collapsing the healthcare system. I've been running around. I drove by the local hospital a couple miles away. It looks fairly normal, except visitor parking is pretty much empty because they've stopped allowing visitors in the hospital. Now, we're not a high-level trauma center, this hospital here. So, but I know a lot of doctors, we have healthcare lawyers, they're laying off doctors and nurses and medical professionals everywhere because everything's sort of being focused on the acute and intensive care sections of the hospital. So large chunks of these hospitals are now just shuttered. So that's why a lot of them appear empty. At least that's my view. And based on what I kind of know from our healthcare lawyers, what's going on. But then that's going to lead to collapse of hospitals when this thing resolves. So, and then you get into the universities, which are shut down. So this thing does not resolve quickly. And I do think, from a Bible prophecy standpoint, we're sort of at the stage where, I even think it myself, it was like, wouldn't it be great if somebody came along that had an answer to this? And when the secular world thinks that, then we're at the stage of, a world leader rising that Bible prophecy tells us will not be very good in the long term.
I just jump in for a second. You're firstly talking about the banking system, like in New Zealand here, the head of the Reserve Bank of New Zealand, which is our central bank, Adrian Orr, said yesterday, economic shockwaves will eventually give way to vibrant, refreshed New Zealand economy. To maintain commitment to our future prosperity, we've ensured the cost of borrowing is very low through reducing the OCR to 0.25% and undertaking quantitative easing. Support each other, think beyond the next 6 months, and then listen to this. This is very United Nations New Age-ish. Visualize the role you can play in the vibrant, refreshed, sustainable, inclusive New Zealand economy.
I think the only trigger word that he missed there was solidarity. As I've listened to Guterres and some of these people from the UN over the last week, and looking through that website that we had talked about, the strategic intelligence at the World Economic Forum, you see this word solidarity everywhere. And we know that's a code word for sort of a international Marxism and equality and sharing and all that, which we know is not a good thing. So, yeah, you're going to see a lot of that kind of rhetoric and words everywhere.
I had a dream years ago which has really come back to me. I've never forgotten it. It was so vivid, where a giant doctor's bag fell out of the sky and hit the ground. It was like massive, and it was like an old leather doctor's bag from the 60s or 70s kind of a look when they used to do home calls, and it hit the ground and all the stuff fell out of it. And it was like the giant doctor is dead was my thought at the time. And then the scene shifted to like an open air surveillance kind of concentration camp. Like there were these surveillance robots going around everywhere surveilling people, and the few people that I saw, which weren't many, seemed like really hopeless. And the dream, I didn't really understand what it meant, but now I'm seeing it. It's like, this is it. This is what my dream was. The healthcare system is failing, and we're entering into a giant surveillance state, like, the entire world. And that's what I saw in this dream, and now it's making sense to me. But
I had a nightmare the other day. I wanted to go to a restaurant and couldn't, and it really wasn't a nightmare. It was real life. I mean, it's... one night I stopped at it's sort of a pub, brew house type place, and they have a decent special. So I stopped there occasionally and picked something up. So I decided, they stopped serving like this tri-tip special that they have because they don't have enough people coming in to cook it slow like they have to. But I walked in, there were probably 2 people in the kitchen, 2 people at the counter, and 2 other people sitting near the bar, which had no stools or chairs or anything. And they had all the giant screen TVs put on, and they were all in the sports channels where nothing was happening. So, and it's funny because I watched ESPN a little bit this morning, and they were arguing about what's going to happen in the season that's probably not going to take place now. And, talking about football. That's about the only one that's not canceled yet. And so I personally don't think that, American football is huge, that the NFL or college football, it's very unlikely to see that. I see I'm a golfer. I love golf. They did move some of the majors towards the year, like they put the Masters in November. They canceled the British Open, the Open. And it won't take place at all this year. So there's a big tournament at Muirfield Village, a couple miles from my house, Jack Nicklaus's Memorial Tournament, and that's at the end of May, early June. They're pretty sure it's not even going to take place then, and there's rumors that it might take place in mid-June with no spectators, This is also surreal. Even the NBA owners today in the basketball league are talking about, they're negotiating with the Players Association now about cutting pay because they have no revenue coming in, and they don't want to pay these millions of dollar contracts. So this is everything we talked about is just so uncharted territory. It's so surreal to watch this going on. It's hard to get your head around.
Yeah, it is. In New Zealand, we have radio sport, which is, like the old-fashioned radio, but they've also got it online. It's been going for years and years. About a week or so ago, they closed down indefinitely because there's no sport to broadcast. So it's gone, whether that'll ever open up again, who knows. But the other thing is just going back to the actual virus itself. You were saying about Boris Johnson now being admitted into intensive care.
Yeah, the word, it just, I subscribe to the Financial Times of London and the Times of London. And, it started popping up on my phone about an hour or so ago, I guess, maybe 2 hours ago, that he'd been admitted to intensive care at a hospital near the Parliament, Westminster, in London, and that he's not on a ventilator yet, but he's being given oxygen. So these are troubling signs because we know from some of the statistics that are coming out that once a person goes on a ventilator, their chances of recovery fall below 50% pretty quickly. Although there are some doctors, I think you mentioned a doctor who's treating these patients, and he says this is very weird. It's not responding the same way, and that maybe the ventilator is not the right treatment, and maybe we just need to get them pump
Actually,
full of
yeah,
oxygen.
I'll just plug that guy if anyone wants to look. I think his name is Dr. Siddle or Sidwell. I haven't got it in front of me, but the name of one of his videos on YouTube is called "From NYC ICU: Does COVID-19 Really Cause ARDS?" He's got a couple of. They're only short videos, but he's actually on the ground in New York, set up an intensive care for coronavirus, and he's going, wait, I've never seen anything like this. This is not responding how we're told it would. It's not responding like a normal pneumonia. And then he's saying the ventilators are actually making things worse the way they're programmed. And he's freaking out a bit, going, we need to look at this and realize this is a whole new disease and it's not the same as what we've been told. And so it's very interesting. I think that it's worth watching his little short videos. They're only like one's 2 minutes and one's 9 minutes type of thing. So
Look,
New York though, there's a lot of deaths happening in New York, and it's I think it's maybe starting to slow down a little bit. But have you heard or do you know anybody yourself that's actually died from this or is very, very serious?
Yeah, actually, I got a phone call from one of my golf buddies, and he said the name, an attorney named such and such had died in Toledo. Well, it was the name of one of my partners, and I said, you got to be kidding me. I mean, he's around 40. He's very vibrant. He was, heavily involved in the Ohio State Senate and the Ohio State House. He's just a tremendous individual. And I started to freak. So I called one of my partners up in Toledo and I said, what's going on? He said, well, yeah, his dad died, who had the same name. He was senior. My partner is junior. And the reason we had heard about it, my friend had heard about it, was Governor DeWine was having his news conference and he teared up and said that the first death in Ohio from the virus was this well-respected attorney, very close friend of his, because this attorney had been involved in politics in Ohio, like Mike DeWine has been, and they're both in their 70s. And he teared up, and he mentioned it again in his news conference the next day. So yes, the father of two of my partners was the first coronavirus death here in Ohio. So they're and because, my update reaches a lot of people around the world, I'm getting a lot of information from a lot of different people that they have friends or relatives that are suffering from it. So, I mean, you only hear a lot of times about the worst cases, but most people, 80% or more of the people, will recover from this with not too much trouble. And so I don't really focus on the mortality rate or anything like that. I focus more on the load that the people that require intensive care put on the healthcare system. That's, I think, where the real problem lies.
Well, see, in New Zealand, case in point, we have over 1,100 supposed cases of the coronavirus, and we've had only one death out of those 1,100 people. I think there's one person in ICU, maybe 13 people in hospital out of all of that. And so our mortality rate here in New Zealand is like 0.1% or something like that. And yet we're on total lockdown. There was an interesting article in Global Research a little while back called Manufactured Pandemic, Testing People for Any Strain of a Coronavirus, Not Specifically for COVID-19. The writer is anonymous, though, a respected professional scientist apparently, who works in healthcare, and he said, here's the problem, we're testing people for any strain of a coronavirus, not specifically for COVID-19. There are no reliable tests for a specific COVID-19 virus. There are no reliable agencies or media outlets for reporting numbers of actual COVID-19 virus cases. This needs to be addressed first and foremost. Every action and reaction to COVID-19 is based on totally flawed data, and we simply cannot make any accurate assessments. This is why you're hearing that most people with COVID-19 are showing nothing more than cold flu-like symptoms. That's because most coronavirus strains are nothing more than cold flu-like symptoms. The few actual coronavirus cases do have some worse respiratory responses, but still have a promising recovery rate, especially for those without prior issues. I can't, vouch for the authenticity of the writer of that, but that's interesting.
Well, it's interesting how we've all sort of become amateur epidemiologists almost overnight. And there are some very, I think, severe inconsistencies. I don't think there is a good, reliable test. I think I would agree with at least based on what I've read, and that, a lot of what they're doing is shooting in the dark. And, there is concern. I think it's a valid concern that too much is being given to the healthcare people to shut everything down. But then on the other hand, for example, in Ohio, there seems to have been a real slowdown in the growth rate of cases. So a couple weeks ago, they were saying, they thought there were 100,000 people that might have the virus already. I think the Ohio Department of Health head has come out and apologized for that and said, well, our model got it wrong. They do try to, and I will make a disclosure in connection with some other litigation. I do represent the Ohio Department of Health on a sort of a discrete issue. But I'm a little bit familiar with how they work and how they analyze. They have tremendous amounts of data that they analyze. So like on the issue it's in litigation, there's millions of pages of documents and presentations and reports and analysis and budgets and to deal with this particular problem. And so I know how the people work. So I know they're probably doing this on the COVID-19 thing, but again, it's a novel virus. It's new. And a lot of what they're doing is guesswork. So they had some pretty dire predictions a couple weeks ago about doubling every 3 or 4 days. And now it's not doubling every 3 or 4 days. It's actually doing pretty well. Now, one response would be, well, they had it all wrong in the first place. But the other response is they pretty much shut everything down and they've been engaged in the mitigation seems to be working. One country that's not doing much in the way of mitigation, they have limited groups that you're supposed to not get together in groups greater than 50 now is Sweden. And they have their bars are open, restaurants are open. I think the schools are open. So they're not really doing official social distancing. I mean, where I go now, like if I go to Costco, there's X's on the floor that are 6 feet apart, and you're only supposed to stand, you're not supposed to pass your X until the guy in front of you passes his X. And everybody seems to be complying. But so in Sweden, they're doing pretty well. But I've been in communication with some people today about that is how's it going over there? And the response back was, well, they have very dire predictions now that the approach, which would be we call the herd immunity approach, let it run wild, and eventually the herd of people will develop enough immunity that it will sort of just slow down. That may have been a mistake. That's what the UK started with. That's what Boris Johnson's initial response was as the hit prime minister there. We'll just let it run wild. But the other interesting thing you said is even though we haven't shut down things, small businesses are going out of business, particularly. And part of that is, I think, people there are sort of staying away. They're staying home more. But again, I think that sort of supports my thesis and the thing we talked about a couple months ago, that the China shutdown unleashed a worldwide financial contagion that's going to take quite a while to ripple through the economy, and it's not going to be pretty. The stats here in the United States, last week, there were 6.6 million unemployment claims filed. The week before, over 10 million in the last 2 weeks. And the analysts that I've follow and read and all these different financial newspapers are saying that in the next 2 to 3 weeks, the number will at least double, maybe triple, and could quadruple. So this is, yeah, I mean, you're talking 30%, 40% unemployment in a couple weeks.
Yeah, I mean, that's huge. That'd be worse than the Great Depression. I just want to also tap you now, as a person in the legal field, you'll probably be able to answer this. I've seen videos of people going, look, they've taken news footage and, for example, there's the classic one where they reused a Italian hospital and reposted it as supposedly being in New York when it was the same footage on Sky from Italy, and that was like people going, this is a hoax or whatever. But then there was another one where someone's pinpointed the fact that there was an obvious mannequin being used, plugged into machines and all of that, and they put that on the news as if it was New York. And they're saying this looks like a hoax because they're using a doll, not a real person. But I was thinking, my thought was, well, heck, the media is not going. They should have labelled it this was an exercise or what training,
Clearly
but they
wrong,
didn't.
right.
But I can't imagine that the actual media, Sky Media News or whoever else, sending a reporter into an actual ICU unit that's full of patients and doctors with this deadly supposed disease in there anyway. And if they did, wouldn't they run the risk of, if a patient got identified, of being sued, or a doctor even?
Well, here, I don't know what the privacy laws are in the New Zealand or the UK, but here in the United States, we have a thing called HIPAA, Health Insurance Privacy Protection Act. And believe me, we have lawyers in our law firm that deal with HIPAA issues exclusively every day of their life for hours with different healthcare clients. The fact that, CBS was wrong to use that short clip, but Sky News had used it, and nobody was claiming that the Sky News clip was fake. I saw a similar clip on Fox where they labeled it as, like Naples, Italy. And so, it was improper. And so I think what happens sometimes is, so in the US, and I'm not, it's funny like this, like if I ever try to say, well, I don't think Bill Gates actually said this, or I'm saying what I think happened, I'm defending CBS and that type of thing. I'm not. I'm just sort of offering you a rational explanation for what happened. So with the HIPAA laws here, going in and filming an ICU unit in any way that would identify a patient, I can assure you that those hospitals are contacting their lawyers, and their lawyers are telling them, don't do that. Now, I did see a report, a video in the New York Times yesterday, and I also saw some reports on Fox. And in those reports, they did have footage from inside U.S. hospitals. But it was interesting to watch because they were, for example, I had a picture of a lady sitting on a bed in a triage room, and she had a hospital gown over her head. And whenever they showed anything regarding a patient, it was filmed so that the patient face or any identifying information from the patient ever made it through. So I think what happened was there was no footage that was available to these networks. So they used stock, like they do a lot of times to make a point. They use stock footage. So in the CBS case, they wrongly and without labeling, and I think they've admitted now that it was wrong, used the Sky News footage that was a few days old from Italy. And I don't know about the mannequin thing. I suppose that could be stock footage from something also. And, there's news reports all the time. Sometimes you'll see a clip and later somebody will find, well, this clip came from a movie or something like that. So, the media is not very careful, and they do try to manipulate the narrative and that type of thing. So,
and sometimes they're rushing to try and get a story out, so they'll just grab some footage. I know I've worked in television in the past, so I know a little bit, on the audio side. I know how it can happen.
Well, look, I mean, we see this with let's be honest, even in our community, on people on YouTube, a lot of times there's a desire to be first with a story rather than a desire to be right and truthful. And so this is it's endemic in the YouTube community. It's endemic in media as well. So it's wrong wherever it is because it's manipulative and it's hype sell. Unfortunately, hype sells.
The other thing I just very quickly want to mention before we close, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but is the people that are saying the whole thing's a hoax or that it's all 5G. And like I said earlier, I do believe that 5G is bad, and I think it could exacerbate what's going on. But I don't think this is all 5G because there are plenty of places where people are actually getting sick and dying, like Ecuador and so on, where isn't 5G. And the other side of that is I was sent, a number of people sent me videos by a supposed ex-British Vodafone head making claims that it's 5G, and that the 1918 Spanish flu was caused by the introduction of radio waves and so on, and that all the pandemics have been when there's been an increase in electromagnetic waves and so on. I'm not going to go into, maybe sometime I need to do a video on this specifically, but there were a lot of red flags to me in that supposed Vodafone guy's story. It's like anything else. There was a lot of truth in it, but the overall narrative and the slant was some untruths in there, and a lot of people didn't pick them up. Like the Spanish flu, there's no way that was caused by radio waves. For a start, there were a lot of Spanish flu cases where there weren't any radio. There was also places where in America, and I can't even think of the name of the town now, where they cordoned off people, did not allow people into the town to stop it. And that town basically had no Spanish flu because they did what we're doing now, the lockdown. So yet they still had radio and so on. There's a whole lot more things in that video that I thought had red flags for me. But so people, we just got to be so careful what we believe. It doesn't matter how well presented it is. Often there's a lot of truth in something, and then there's some untruths. And the other thing is, the guy didn't even give his name, so we don't even know if he really was a head of Vodafone or not. He may have been. But there was a lot of stuff in that video that I've got to say didn't sit right with me at all. So
I've seen that too, and I agree with you that this is broken out where there's not 5G. And the unfortunate thing is there have actually been some towers in the UK that have been burned and destroyed by people. And these towers are used for emergency communications on other radio frequencies. So, as a lawyer, I understand the thing about 5G, but I also know that the calculus that goes into things here in the United States. Here we have these ads that appear from lawyers like, were you exposed to asbestos? You might be entitled to compensation. Call this law firm and we'll represent you for, 30 or 40% of what you recover as our fee. We'll help you get compensated. And I was joking the other day with my wife, as I'm sure in 10 years, if we're still around, and there will be, legal ads that were you exposed to hand sanitizer during the 2020 pandemic, you might be entitled to compensation. So I think what I've seen, and, as a lawyer, I have to go into court on the technical side. Sometimes I have to learn a little bit about a lot about the science, so I can cross-examine people. And what I've seen, my reaction when I've seen some of these videos, and believe me, I've been sent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them.
Me too.
My reaction is, I would like to have a couple weeks to prepare and cross-examine this guy, because I think I could really undermine what he's doing, because it sounds good. And I guess my encouragement would be to people is, this is, regardless of whatever's going on and the cause and the who did it. Was this intentional? Is this the globalists, doing an intentional takedown of the economy? we live in an incredibly difficult time, and I'm a pretty rational person. Um, it's had an impact on my life, but I'm sort of in the stage of transitioning to retirement anyway, so I don't have the pressures that I know a lot of people do with their businesses are failing, they're unemployed, they have families. Man, I believe me, just even in our little church, the carnage, the economic carnage that's happening, even when people are healthy, is mind numbing. So I think the one thing that we need to be careful about is trying to do too much to explain everything away, or a simple explanation, or just finding things that might make us feel better about explaining the situation. I think it's okay to say we really don't know exactly how it started or what's going on. But I do know that we are dealing with a financial, and I've focused probably more on the economic thing myself, just because it's related to my legal practice. But listen, Tony, I was around in 2008. I was a young lawyer in 1987 when everything crashed. There was a big downturn in the stock market. And I'm just telling you is that this is unlike anything that has been seen since the Great Depression.
Well, I made a video recently called something along the lines of, will the Great Depression seem like a picnic compared to what's coming? And I honestly think we're going to get much worse than the Great Depression. As far as simple explanations go, I don't think people need to be going, this is 5G or this is a virus or whatever. There is always the possibility that this is a bad virus, that some strains of it are worse than others, and that even 5G may exasperate it in places where 5G is. If 5G, it does bad things on people's cells and whatnot, they could have an actual virus that's being not helped by 5G without it having. So you don't have to, what I'm saying is you don't have to throw out the 5G thing entirely or the virus, because it's possible there's a combination of things. Okay, I would like to look to wrap up, John. Have you got any final thoughts maybe that you would like to give?
I would say too, I share your concerns about 5G, just because from the tracking standpoint of what people are going to do with this. And so, listen, the one thing that I think is unmistakable in all this is that the globalist, and again, people should go to look at that strategic intelligence part of the World Economic Forum, because to me, that's almost like a roadmap. Yes. For the globalist governance. And you see all of a sudden everybody's talking about, we need a global solution, we need a global solution, we need a global solution. So in terms of, in the Christian community, those of us who are futurists when it comes to Bible prophecy, we know that this is, I don't know that it's it, but it's certainly a harbinger of even more that's coming. And I think that we always need to be cognizant and aware of that. And so, look, I think we need to sort of dial back the rhetoric. If somebody is going out and buying a couple extra rolls of toilet paper, they're not panicking. I like what I think it was Joel Richardson who tweeted this a few weeks ago. I've quoted it before. At least I saw it on his Twitter feed. And he said that carelessness is not faith in terms of how you deal with this. Carelessness is not faith, and common sense and preparation is not panic.
Yeah.
So I think and so I've sort of looked at that. So I see people, that if you do go out and shop and make sure you have things stocked up, and we said this 2 months ago, people need to start preparing for what's coming. And at least here, everything seems to be moving along pretty well. The only thing that I see in the stores, the toilet paper situation is up and down. But the one thing that's missing in the stores pretty consistently is pasta. So everybody must be cooking Italian type dishes now, I guess, because the pasta aisles are completely empty. So listen, I'm not, I'm stressed because of what I see happening to people around me. And I'm concerned about that. And I'm also concerned, but ultimately I'm more concerned about whether people are right with the Lord because of the time that we're entering into. Because I do think, I don't claim to be a prophet, but I do think we're at a point where we can say that it's very, very unlikely that things will ever be the same again.
Totally agree. And it's time that people need to get our lives right. All of us need to get our lives right with the Lord. If people don't know salvation through Jesus Christ, then now is the time to do that, to seek the Lord. And even those of us who do, I guess it's time we stop playing around with our seriousness and get really serious about our walk with the Lord, read our Bibles and so on, and we'll get a bit better of an understanding on what's going on.
Can I make a suggestion real quick? At the end of my video yesterday, my update, I played a clip of a Orthodox, not ultra-Orthodox, but Orthodox Jewish rabbi. He was talking about what was awakening within him was a desire for Moshiach, for the Messiah to come. And, there's concerns about that they're looking for the wrong Messiah. We need as Christians to point them to the true Messiah. But the other thing that struck me was, he got very emotional. And so my takeaway from it was, am I looking forward to the coming of the Messiah as much as he is? It provoked me to sort of rethink how I'm acting in my life. Am I ready for the return of the Lord?
Yeah, and that's a good point for all of us. I'm the same. It's kind of challenging me because I know God puts his finger on things in me that I need to work on, and he's going, and if time is short, and I do believe it is, I do think we are now living in the book of Revelation personally. But anyway, I want to say thank you so much for a very interesting discussion again today, John. It's been amazing.
Great. God bless. Look forward to the next time.
Yeah, we'll get you back again soon. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Folks, you can find John Haller's YouTube channel, Fellowship Bible Chapel, on YouTube. And also don't forget A Minute to Midnight, our website, aminutemidnight.com. Please bookmark it and follow us there. We do put our videos on YouTube. We also put them on our website completely separate from YouTube. And we have audio-only versions on iTunes and also on our website too. So aminutemidnight.com should be your one-stop shop for all the Minute to Midnight stuff. Please like this video if you are watching it on YouTube and share it. And also we do run A Minute to Midnight 100% by donations. If you're able to help, that's greatly appreciated. Very, very grateful to the people that helped support A Minute to Midnight because couldn't run it without your help. Also, the music used in the shows I've written, played and recorded. That's it for this show. God willing, we'll be back in a few days' time with another episode.